It's doing the same thing again. Well, we're live. Hey, what do you know? Hi, folks. So I'm Tom Trimbath. I'll get over here so they can see me for a little bit. I'm not going to stand in front of the screen all the time. This is the third time I've done this talk every 6 months for the last, well, basically a year. But that's because things keep changing in real estate. Do it more often than that would be a little ridiculous. To do it much longer than that would be almost a little moot. So, but what we've done is taking advantage of the fact that I've got a very geeky background. I used to be an engineer at Boeing. Matter of fact, what's it say down here? She said jack of all trades. A consultant, a writer, a writer. There's my books. A speaker, a teacher, a photographer. These books. An engineer. So I was an engineer at Boeing to the sort that when the black box data comes back, ours was the group that actually had to go sort through the data and try to make sense out of it. We did a lot of other things too, but entrepreneur and a real estate broker. Not exactly straightforward how I went from engineer to real estate broker, but what happened was I retired early, 38, which inspired one of the books about personal finance. And in the course of that, I started writing books. Accidentally, I bicycled across the United States. So just keep pedaling. And then after that, I went, I can write a book better than that, write a book better than that. So I kind of got myself known as a writer. Whatever. Writers don't make a whole lot of money. In the midst of that, we had this thing called the Great Recession. My book on personal finance came out as the market crashed and as I lost 80% of my net worth in 4 months. At which point, a friend of mine pointed out to me that there are very few writers who understand personal finance, who understand data, who could actually write about what's happening to people who are losing their houses. So I was hired to be a real estate journalist for several years, which encompassed the period from when we were having all those foreclosures into when all of a sudden Seattle's market is just going nutso. So what I was writing about changed dramatically within a few years. So I've been writing about this sort of thing. People get to hear about it and whatnot. And it turns out that as far as some of the realtors I knew were concerned, I knew more about the market and why it worked and how it was working than they did because I was looking at the data. So they encouraged me to become a broker. Hence, I become a broker. In the midst of all that, then, I've been doing so many talks for the library that at one point I got tapped. It's like, could you go tell us what's happening in the market? And hence, that's where we are here. So there's the background. That's why you're going to see a lot of data. A lot of what happens in real estate is anecdotes because a house is a personal thing. And people want to tell those stories and what's happening in the market. So what I wanted to do is look in the data and see how many of those anecdotes are actually backed up by data. And that's why I'm going to predominantly work from the data and then tell the anecdotes rather than going the other way around. So that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And yeah, feel free to ask questions. Like I say, you may find yourself on YouTube. The first time I did this, we had about this many people in the room. We had 130 online. So that's kind of a trip. So is Whidbey is changing. The first time we did this was, is Whidbey changing? It's like, well, duh, yes it is. There are some things that are happening on the island that are, in some regards, unique to the island. And part of it gets into affordable housing, which is kind of where I'm coming at this from. But of course, to talk about affordable housing, you have to talk about housing and you have to talk about affordable. So we're going to hit both of them, the real estate and the economy. In the news, you hear the market's up, the market's down, and it's almost like, okay, there's one line. What's the one line? So if you want to see what prices are doing in Whidbey Island, there, we're done. There's nothing else. We can all go home now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into what's really going on with this. But one thing is obvious. 5 years ago, a median home price on Whidbey was about $225,000. And now we're over $380,000. And that's in 5 years. Now, granted, this was recovering from the Great Recession and things like that. But that's a heck of a climb. If income had risen to the same extent, then affordability would have stayed the same. But of course it hasn't. So we're going to get into some of those details. The other caveat I got is you hear on the news, the market's up, the market's down, that sort of thing. But it all depends on who you're talking to as to what they're talking about. A builder wants to know how many are being built. A real estate broker wants to know how many houses there are on the market, because I don't care how many are getting built. If I know how many I'm selling, they don't care how many are selling as long as they're getting paid to build them. And of course, homeowners are more interested in the number of them that are selling, the prices that they're selling at, and is that something that's happened over the last year or the last decade or just last month. So I'm going to go into those kind of details, and I'll kind of keep it going as much as I can. But that's also why you can hear 3 different news stories the same day, and they all say different things, even if they're using the same words. So this is what the market does. The market is comprised of a few thousands of homes on Whidbey Island, and Island County as well, if you include that. Here's what's happened to one house. And I show this one just as an example of how screwy the data is. This happens to be my house. So talk about being public with things. Here's my address. I'm a single guy. What the heck? I'm not really worried about a whole lot. And also, as one sheriff put it when he looked in my house, he said, you don't have to worry about locking up because they're going to look in the windows and they're going to realize there's nothing to steal. That has more to do with me being a minimalist than anything else. I moved out of one house at one point, and we didn't have to stay. We had to put furniture in to make it look like it had been lived in. But anyway, you can go get an estimate for your house. And of course, realtors are always, that's one of the things that they do as an introduction. I'll show you what the house value is. But I show this as an example of how varied estimates can be. Now, these are not realtor answers. These are Zillow, Redfin, and a couple of the industry things. So think about it. You talk to a realtor and you're going to ask, what's the value of my house? And they're going to look at your house and the neighborhood. They have their own way of doing it, and they're going to come up with an answer. There's over 120 realtors on the south end of the island. I'm sure you wouldn't expect them to all come up with exactly the same number. So think about it this way. These are 4 different estimates that are compiled by teams of mathematicians, in some cases, multi-billion-dollar corporations. So this is a concerted effort. If they all made it so simple, it would all agree. So this is one small house. It's only 868 square feet. And Zillow at one time was saying my house was 280 at the very same time that one of the industry ones was saying 360. It's really hard to pin down the particular value of a particular house. So if you find that when I talk about a median house price on Whidbey and you think you've got a median house and the price is different than that, keep in mind that there's that much variation in some of these estimates. And one thing I do encourage you to do, though, is to not take these as gospel. This is like the case of somebody with 4 watches trying to figure out what time it is. But you can at least check Zillow and Redfin. I think Estate does the same thing. And you plug in your address and they'll give you an estimate of how much your house is worth. If it's not obvious, Zillow changes almost every single day and will sometimes change dramatically. Redfin doesn't change as often, doesn't change as much. And this one just doesn't change. This one's just staying constant. And yet they're all kind of tending towards the same thing, but that's still pretty widespread. Anyway, so that's just part of the caveat of what to expect when you try to figure out what your house is worth.
Hey Tom, what is the green one?
These 2 are ones that are inside the industry. So they're the ones that realtors get to see when they pay into the association and things like that. So you may be able to find those, but I'm not sure how you could get at them otherwise. Hello. Go on in. So that's what it's like for just one house. So we'll go back to this chart that I showed earlier. This is the median sales price on Whidbey for the last 10 years. We bottomed out at 220 in the mid-2012, so 7 years ago. And then just came up, and when I first gave one of these talks, we were just at this point, and folks were talking about Seattle's prices falling, which was one of the reasons to come back, because it's like, well, are Seattle's prices falling? And, well, whether they are or aren't, Whidbey's was just sitting still. It was just boring and flat until the last month or 2. And of course, The optimist will say, well, if last month it was up, this month it'll be up. The pessimist will say, well, last month it was up, this month it'll be down. So take your pick as to which way you want to go with that. One way to kind of normalize that, though, is because that gets affected by the size of the houses that were sold. So the median price per square foot, this is an average, this is median, smooths that out quite a bit. And from that standpoint, since, come on, wrong button. It's nice tech, but I gotta get trained on it. Since about 2015, the price per square foot has just pretty much been going up. So that flattening we saw in the previous one isn't there. So this indicates that the price is going to keep going, at least for now. So this is all the properties, whether they're land or houses or condos. And here's where things start to break up. So here's the black line is housing. These are the regular residences, regular stick built. And sure enough, that was flat and it came up a little bit, but not as much as that other chart shows. Condominiums, they're kind of falling a little bit. And you come down here to manufactured and they're bouncier. There are fewer of them. This is land. And land last month went up 10% in 1 month. In the previous 12 months, it went up over 40%. So last August, back around in here, it was about $85,000 for a normal listing. Now it's up over $130,000 in 13 months. One of the indications that's coming off from this is that if people are running out of houses to buy, they might be buying land to build on. Now, this is just data on what's sold. This doesn't say why they sold it or why somebody bought it. But that's the trend I'm watching right now because there's only so much land on the island. Some of these charts look like earthquakes happen. Sorry about that. But what I'll concentrate on in this one is down here at the very last bit. Now, almost everything except land, land's up here still, everything else is only taking a few weeks to sell. The median is only taking a few weeks to sell. You'll still have houses that take over a year. Whereas back 10 years ago, that was months. And now we're talking about weeks. Look at this, and we'll get to it. Oak Harbor is in the course of days. Seattle is in the course of days. One of the reasons this is starting to happen is because the number of houses available has really dramatically dropped. We don't talk about condos and manufactured homes much because they're not a very large part of the market. The black line are houses, and this orange line is vacant land. Now, vacant land, there's not as much as there had been, but you look at it in terms of, 2009, we had over 800 houses for sale in any given month. It might only come on for a day or two, it may be on for a month, and they're all just stacked up. But now we're looking at under 300. That's more than a 60% drop in the number of houses available for folks to go buy. So if it seems like it was busier then than it is now, at least in terms of what you have to pick from, that it really is the case. And then about 3 years ago, you ended up with fewer houses than land. Now, about 3 years ago, if you notice, that's when that was really starting to kick in. Now that we've had a drop in land and now that land prices are going up, I'm going to be curious to see what happens 6 months from now. Hence doing this every once in a while. One of the things that's making the difference, has anybody heard of the Navy in Oak Harbor? This is 2016. And all of a sudden, there's 2,200 people that they added. Now, that's 2,200 people that they had in 2016, and more crews are coming onto the island. I've been to some of the housing meetings up in Oak Harbor, and it's interesting that I have yet to be able to find anybody who can point to me where the Navy said, we're going to move these people to Whidbey, and there's enough room for them. And I asked the county, do you know how many folks the island can accommodate? And they don't have a number for that. So the Navy was told to close bases in other places, and they had to put the people somewhere, and they decided to put them here. But there's nothing to say that there's enough room for them on the island. So that gets into demand.
Tom, when you say enough room, are you basing that on water? What do you mean enough room?
Keep going, you're in the right direction. Water, sewer, land that isn't protected for one reason or another. Land that's safe. There's some great bluff properties I can think of. So there's demand and there's a supply. Supply's down, demand is up, and basic economics says that, price is going to get more expensive. The price will go up. But I was curious about the affordable side. So what I decided to do is I went back through and I looked at the data again, and I broke it out by house prices. And so the black line is 300,000 or less, which I just use as a general. It's an easy number to remember. Under that should be affordable. And broke it up by 300,000 to 600, then 600 to a million, and then a million or more. Today is one of the rare events where there are just as many houses available over a million as there are under 300,000. And that is atypical in that last year there were 30% more $1 million houses, and only, for instance, instead of 14 under 300,000, there are only 4. There are only 4 houses under $300,000. And if you're a barista, that's going to be difficult to deal with. So the $300,000 houses, that's where most of that drop is. That's where that 800 is, and that comes down to 300. And then the 300 to 600 is the other one with the big drop. The other two don't have much, whether they have a drop or not. It's just that not that many units. So on a percentage basis, we're now up to about 20 to 22% of the houses are $1 million homes. Again, lots of chatter, but if you just look at the end, things that have been taking months are now taking weeks, and it's true for every category of home. It's not just the expensive ones, it's not the mid-range, everything is taking a lot less time. Okay, so I'm looking at it in terms of price, but how about in terms of size? Because there's the starter home, the young couple, the 2 people sharing a house for whatever reason. So the black line down here are the ones that I like the best. My house is 868 square feet. These are under 1,000. As far as tiny houses go and things like that, as much as there are great things to talk about, I really am a fan of them, it's not a large segment of the market. The next chunk up is 1,000 to 2,000, and that's where that majority is. And again, that's gone from almost 500 down to just about 100. That's a dramatic drop in the smaller houses, 1,000, 2,000 square foot houses. And then you get into 2,000 or 3,000, and those have dropped, but it's a smaller segment. And you get into the 3,000 or more, and they've dropped. But again, it's not nearly as much of an impact as the cheap houses and the small houses have gone away. And they tend to be the affordable ones. The only difference I show here is that same thing about how long it's been taking to sell them, except for the fact that, while everything else is selling pretty quick, I mean, that's down in the order of like 3 weeks. 3,000 square foot and above takes a while. And it is month and a half. But again, this is the median. So there's going to be a bunch of them that take less time and a bunch of them that take more time. But a house that's over 3,000 square foot generally just takes longer to sell. A lot of folks want the smaller and the cheaper ones. Okay, so we did it by price and we did it by size and really how many bedrooms do you need, because that ties into the septic system and all that sort of thing. And everything's down. The largest chunk are the 3-bedroom houses. But the one that shows the biggest drop again are the 1-bedrooms and smaller. So for folks that are individuals, somebody who's older than me, maybe just my age, and wants to just downsize to 1 person, 1 house kind of thing, or just however many you can shove into a bedroom, that has gone down over 80%. Now that might have something to do with the county being stricter about making sure that each house has a 2-bedroom septic. If it's got a 2-bedroom septic, why build only 1 bedroom? I don't know. Again, I could just show you these are the houses that have sold, and finding a 1-bedroom house, I like it that says 1 bedroom or fewer. But studios happen. And that's kind of the way I live. So I have an 868 square foot house, and I only use about 2/3 of it. So, like I said, I'm a minimalist. But it's really nice having one room that's totally empty, as my dancer friends will know. So I have my own little dance floor. But I digress. And same thing again. In terms of the number of bedrooms does not change whether or not it's going to sell fast or slow. That's still going to come down to whether or not it's a big house or not. So the whole idea of conventional wisdom being buy the biggest house you can afford, that's being challenged here, at least on the island. Similar story with lot size. Won't dwell on it too much because it hasn't really changed how many houses are available. But as much as Whidbey is known for being rural, the majority of the lots are still less than a half acre. They're suburban type lots. The 5-acre ones, well, I have to use particular software. I can't just go up and make this stuff from my own parsing through the database, because I have to have, this is Thomas Trimbath, Caldwell Banker Terra Properties, and there's all contact information. The state actually requires all this disclosure stuff, and it also kind of hamstrings. I would love to show what is happening with 5-acre and above, 10-acre and above, 20-acre and above, but there we go. And again, lot size, bigger takes longer to sell, and smaller takes less time. So you take all those things together, and your folks are hunting for, the small houses, relatively cheap houses, 1 or 2 bedrooms on small lots, which really sounds more like suburbia than a rural county. So all that was about Whidbey in general. And if you live south of Greenbank, north of Coopville's different. And so north, south, and central Whidbey, basically South Whidbey, I'm going to talk about, is going to be Greenbank South. North Whidbey is going to be basically Penn Cove North. Not exactly, but it's close enough. Libby Road. And central is in between the two. And central has got the one with the practice field. But so here's that median sales price now. Instead of just everybody all in one, starts to break out south versus central versus north. Not big surprise, South Whidbey is the most expensive. So instead of the median price being around $340, like we were shown when everybody was put together, South Whidbey's $400 and climbing. And it didn't have near as much of a plateau in here, and the ramp up recently has been more than 1 or 2 months. And of course, it also had that kick. The green one is North Whidbey, and that's not too much of a surprise. A lot of folks that would be less than South Whidbey, just because it tends to have more transitory housing, because the Native personnel are in or out more often, that kind of thing. The surprising one to me is this black one. This black one is Central Whidbey. It had a rise that was more abrupt than South Whidbey's, plateaued, it kind of did an overshot, and is coming back up again.
How
So-
does that compare though with the availability?
Where did I
is
get
there
to that?
okay. I mean, that's
Good
there's
ask.
nowhere else
I'm
to
glad you're
buy.
asking. So again, the one way I said is, break this stuff out is you look by square foot. It takes out whether it's a big house versus a small house. And here it all of a sudden just gets to be much more distinct. South Whidbey by square foot is over $250 a square foot. Central's in the middle and north is in the bottom. And that just that's not just for 1 month, that's for years, over about a decade, and probably longer than that. As for how many there are available, here's Central Whidbey, which is the smallest. And Central Whidbey is the one that really does the best job of living up to the rural Whidbey sort of thing. They've got the biggest farms, they've got the Evie's Prairie and that kind of thing. Depending on when you're looking at it, South Whidbey and North Whidbey dance back and forth around each other. Right now, there's more. Here, there definitely was more. But ostensibly, they're both going to do the same thing. They're both having a lot of decrease in how many houses are up for sale at any one time. And supply and demand, that's saying supply is down. if you've been here longer than 1 year, you're kind of aware that the tourists make a difference.
Mhm.
And here's what kind of makes a difference. Those peaks are in the summer, those valleys are in the winter. One of the things that happens with supply and demand, and I'm not an economist, I just, get used to looking at numbers, is that when supply goes down so far that it runs into a bottom, it can't go to zero, it can't go negative. But you're going to get to a point where there's always going to be somebody that has to sell. Somebody dies, somebody moves, somebody gets married and moves off to somewhere else. Then that's when the prices start to kick in. So what I was looking at was not so much the peaks, but where the valleys are. And the valleys are starting to flatten. We're starting to get close to what could be the minimum inventory for each of these areas. If demand stays high and supply doesn't get any larger, then the prices go up. And that's what we've been seeing for the last 3 or 4 years. Median days on market, the one thing that stands out on this one is that North Whidbey is just busy. We're all busy, but instead of being like 3 weeks, they're like just over 2.5. So houses are moving really quickly up in North Whidbey. My broker friends up there are just busting. They're hopefully doing well. They're taking care of themselves. But, okay, so that's north-south, and come off it. I live in Clinton. I don't say I live in South Whidbey. Well, I do, but I live in Clinton. So I've decided to go through and take a look at each of the individual cities and see what they do, what they are distinguished by. Clinton is a ferry. It's not the only thing going on in Clinton, but it's the easiest thing to identify in Clinton. So the best way that I figured to compare Clinton then was to compare the other side of the ferry. So here's Mukilteo. Clinton is just kicking up over 400,000. Keep in mind the median for the island's like 340, and Clinton's above the median. But Mukilteo is 600. So at least right now, there's about a $180,000 discount for being on the island in Clinton relative to Mukilteo. And you could argue I put this up on Twitter. I put all this stuff up on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff like that. And some folks in Mukilteo, of course, responded back to my tweets. And they said, well, we have better schools. We've got the West Side View. They were going on and on because they're proud of Mukilteo. But I know that we've got unobstructed views of the Olympics, and some folks like our schools. Whether that's enough or not, I don't know, but that's a heck of a drop for folks in Seattle that are hunting for a place to live. Here's a $180,000 discount for a median house. And I think that's going to, well, I know it's being reflected because I'm now starting to talk to folks who are hunting for commuter homes. And if you run out of places to live in Seattle, maybe you live on Whidbey. When I go through the price per square foot, it kind of evens out, which suggests that Mukilteo has bigger houses than Clinton. But I'll let you go tour Mukilteo and tour Clinton open houses and let you make up your own mind about that. But it still comes up to the fact that both of them are climbing. The prices are going up in both places. Langley. And you tell somebody in Goss Lake about Langley, and they can consider themselves in Langley. And you talk to somebody who's in a condo in downtown Langley, and that's Langley. So I decided to compare 98260 to what's actually legally Langley to what's happening down in the core. I used to live in downtown Langley, by the way, so it's kind of fun doing this. The orange line is downtown Langley. Feel sorry for the folks that were looking at $470 a square, or 470,000, and then 2 years later looked at 250. So I'm going to keep mentioning the fact that prices go up, but if you want to talk about how fast prices can come down, there's your case study, and this is not to be ignored. Right now, whether we're in a recession or not, I think we're going to end up in one just because so many folks are saying we're going to have a recession. That means we're going to have a recession. So that is something to guard against. And you can also see that we've had some major drops recently, But then again, this trend line is pretty good, and we'll get into, I'm not going to say I know where it's going, but I know I'm watching these bumps, and if that next bump is down, that's going to be discouraging. If that next bump is back up to that level, it's going to suggest it's continuing. But it's only going to suggest, you never know. And these aren't the prices houses were listed at. These are actually sale prices. So each one of these data points represents a number of folks who have actually bought that house or sold that house. So it's not theoretical. It's a decision somebody made on both sides that fixed that's the price for that house. Whether that's mathematically the true value for that house is secondary. The fact that somebody's willing to buy it for that, somebody was willing to sell it for that. When I go through and I look at dollars per square foot, for one, remember that drop I was talking about? It turns out this may have been a bad data point that they've since corrected, but it was still a drop. The drop is just much smaller than this suggests. But even at that, downtown Langley is one thing completely different from the rest of Langley and from the rest of the zip code. The rest of Langley and the rest of the zip code, effectively no difference. Downtown Langley just sits out there on its own. So downtown Langley is catching the news. And to many people that means, oh, Langley is doing that. Well, if you're on 2nd Street, if you're in a condo on 1st Street, yeah. But if you're, like I say, out by Whidbey Island, maybe not. Okay, we're in Freeland. Freeland is easy for a lot of folks to overlook because they think Payless and Ace, the highest concentration of marijuana shops south of Oak Harbor, which I'm still curious about. It seems like Clinton should have that. But there's not a waterfront here. And it isn't just the houses that are around Payless. So when you think about all the stuff on the west side, all the stuff around Holmes Harbor, so what I did was I broke out the sales price by waterfront. Now this is skewed a little because somebody on Goss Lake can claim waterfront legitimately. So they don't break it into freshwater and saltwater because this is a database that has to work for the entire state, and they're not going to ignore all the folks in Moses Lake. But predominantly, we've been talking about median sales prices of about $400,000, $300,000, and waterfront in Freeland is $1 million, roundabouts. So as much as there's a mindset that Langley's where the expensive properties are, there's a whole cadre of expensive properties in Freeland, which ironically, $1 million properties in Freeland. And the other ones, if they were shown on a regular scale, would seem expensive. But at this scale, you're talking about 300,000 versus $1 million, right? They're triple the price. Now, there aren't as many of them. And if you take it by a square foot, $450 a square foot versus $240 a square foot. Freeland is two different communities. It's this sort of thing, including in Langley, not necessarily in Clinton, but including in Langley, is I think what starts to drive the politics. Who is really voting? When I lived in Langley, I noticed that the folks in Brookhaven tend to live there year-round. They can show up for every single meeting. A lot of the other folks are only here part-time. Who gets the vote? Who gets the voice? It makes for, I think that's why our politics are more complicated than they are in other places. Coopville. Because as much as Coopville's got an awful lot of other things going for it, everyone's talking about the noise. Has everybody seen this chart before? Okay. There's some that are saying yes, there are some that are saying no. So these, let's see, where is it? Where is it? So, right down in here is going to be OLF, the outlying field. And that's where they're practicing carrier operations without having to go splash. And that's why they need it. They need to be able to practice at sea level or near to it. These contours are where the noise profiles are supposed to be. This is not where they are. This is where they speculate. So as they come in and they take off, and they come in and they take off. And this red line here, so each of, this is the noisiest, less noisy, less noisy. And this orange line here is where it's 65 decibels. And I know some folks in the room who have lived where it's obviously not 65 decibels. If you've been up there during operations, well, put it this way, going to a dance up there during operations, you got to remember the beat until the jet passes by. And that's actually had, yeah. But so what I did was I took a look at all the houses that are inside that contour, which took a little playing with the map, and also compared against downtown downtown Coopville, just like did downtown Langley. And then took a look at what the prices have been. I'll skip the suspense.
Where's the downtown on that? Can you point to that?
Should be right there.
Right.
It's in that vicinity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, because that point is not it. And if I'm saying this wrong, those of you who used to live in Coopville, tell me. For one thing, the number of homes that are in that 65 decibel profile is actually fairly significant. Here's outside it. Here's outside it. Here's downtown Coopville. Understandably, a lot fewer houses. And then this is in the vicinity of, so it's a large part of that market. A lot of folks have been saying they don't want to live in Coopville because of the noise. I have no clients except for 3 who have any desire to live north of Greenback because they fear the noise. If the noise was doing that much to them, and Lord, keep in mind, I'm down in Clinton. I'm as far, this is before the F-18s came in. I wanted to move down there because I didn't want to be near that noise. But that black line, it may be lower than the other ones, but that's the character in that area. It's not going down. And if anything, look what happened just to Coopville. Now, that may just be because there's so few houses there that a few of them skew the curve. But if I take it by square foot, it does kind of soften it a bit. Then you get a few data points doing something weird like that. But if you just look at this section out here, they're all going up. Price per square foot is going up. Having heard so many folks that don't want to be there, I know a bunch of folks that do. There are people that like the noise. They liken it to, I know one person in particular likens it to being in a drag strip. He likes that horsepower. He likes that sound. To him, this is a neat thing. That's something to go outside and take a look at. And when you consider how few houses there are in Oak Harbor on the market, then Navy personnel who live on board aircraft carrier for months at a time, they may not care. To them, that's not a problem. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, and I think the term here is the sound of freedom. That's it. And I was born and raised in Pittsburgh from 3 different steel mills within 3 or 4 miles. And for us, we were told that the smog was the smell of progress. In both cases, they tied it to jobs. And of course, at some point, Pittsburgh kind of went, no, but I don't know if that's going to happen here. I think the Navy's got some other things going on. We can talk about that. But I used to be an aerospace engineer, so I've got opinions on the F-18 itself.
So they're about to quadruple the number of passes. So
Yeah.
that could.
And that's why I'm going to be watching this. I'm real curious. Because, again, it gets into, I know how many folks don't want to live there, but how many folks need to live there? And, yeah, I'm not sure. By the way, the other thing to put this all in perspective is that 65 decibel zone, which basically covers that entire width of the island at that point. Some friends of mine are concerned about the 737s coming out of Payne Field now as commercial flights. That 65 decibel pattern around Payne Field doesn't make it past the fence line. So they're that much quieter. 737s are much quieter airplane, much quieter engines than an F-18. F-18 is 737's got to worry about violating noise curfews and getting fined for being noisy. F-18s are not going to get fined by anybody, though I'm sure there are certain lawsuits that are trying to change that. Anyway, so I'll be interested to see what happens when I present this in Coopville. Oak Harbor's got the issue that I talked about at the very start. Where do they put all the people? remember I was showing how much we've lost the small houses, the cheap houses, and that sort of thing. Same thing's happening up there. They're going from about 360 for the cheapest houses down to about 50. So 350 down to about 50. So that is 6/7 of a drop. They've never had very many $1 million homes or ones just above it. Right now, I said, I think there's about $14 million homes or something like that on the South half. The number changes every day, so my memory of it changes every day. But like right now, there's 6 in Oak Harbor, and frequently there's only like 4. And they're valid homes. You start looking up in the north of Oak Harbor, and there's some gorgeous sites. I mean, straight down the Straits of Fuca, you've got a view, or you could be looking over at the Dugala Bay. But again, they've lost a lot of homes there at the low end. That's why the months of supply for the cheapest houses is down here. They could burn up their entire inventory in like a month and a half, 2 months. Whereas it used to take 2 years to use up all the inventory they had for their high-end housing about 10 years ago. So that's all Whidbey, and that's broken up in a lot of different ways. Hopefully not too many different ways to be overwhelming. But you can also see why, to talk about any individual house, you then get into that finer of a distinction. My neighborhood is Sandy Hook. It is a predominantly summer neighborhood. That's going to be completely different than Campbell's Glen, which doesn't have a view, but it's a nice commuter neighborhood that has good access to the ferry. Each neighborhood is different. But to get back then again to Whidbey Island. Whidbey Island, most folks at least accepted the topic that there's an affordability issue. I've heard a variety of comments as to whether it's a big issue or a small issue. I think if you're living in the woods, it's a large issue. If not, it's less of an issue. But I decided to do a comparison against the other major islands in the Puget Sound area because are we the outlier? And we are. Here's Bainbridge at 840,000. Here's Vashon just coming off of 600. There's San Juan coming up to 500. And suddenly our 330 or 340 makes Whidbey the cheapest of the major islands in the Puget Sound. Now you can go off to Smith Island, or you can go off and find smaller ones and whatnot, and you can get different answers. But for somebody on the mainland who wants to move to an island that has either a bridge or a ferry service or both, Whidbey's the cheapest.
How does that compare though, like to apartment availability? I mean,
I can at least get to the total number of houses,
yeah,
but I didn't break it out by that.
because apartment, it doesn't seem like there's very much apartment availability here.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Versus maybe some of the others, when I visited, they seem to have more availability. So affordable housing in general, if you included apartments, would it look differently?
You can always make it look different. But I'm sure Bainbridge has many more apartments than Whidbey does.
Yes.
San Juan Island actually has a fair number of apartments because of Friday Harbor. There we used to have a lot of condos. And again, go back to who's,
Following up on her question.
Yeah.
What is a house? Is it one apartment? Is it a set of apartments? How about an apartment building?
the way these data are compiled, I believe a house, a condo, manufactured home, geodesic dome, they all get fit into that. Not a rental, but something that is owned by the occupant.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, you can totally skew it, not totally skew it, you can get a different answer, I'm sure, if you can work into the rental data, but unfortunately I don't have access to that database.
Right. I mean, as far as an affordability issue,
Mhm.
I mean, it's a totally different thing.
And an affordability, I think, is going to be greatly enabled by rentals, but that's a topic for, yeah. I'll be happy to come back and talk about that after I get some data. But talk to her. She's the inspiration. So that was for the islands, and I figured, okay, well, let's take a look at the mainland. And again, Whidbey is the cheapest. Now, for a while, we were kind of duking it out with Everett and Bellingham, and they've kind of pulled away from us. But we had this little bit of a flat spot, but again, the houses themselves are going up. Bellingham and Everett have actually still just softened a little bit. They're still going up. And sure enough, the first time I did this, we were wondering about whether or not Seattle was going to be falling off, and it was, and it has been. But on a relative basis, I mean, you look at zero's down about here, and you're looking about a difference of that much. It's a small difference. Now, that's many millions of dollars, if not more than that. But after a rise like that, it was, well, it's basically about where Whidbey was, where Whidbey is. So in 7 years, Seattle saw that kind of a rise. So if it comes back a little, that's not much of a surprise. Especially, I got it right, good. So here's the number of houses for sale between Bellingham, Everett, Seattle, and Whidbey. Everett actually has fewer homes for sale than Whidbey does, because Everett's constrained by geography. Bellingham doesn't have as many constraints, but still, all of Whidbey Island is more than these two. Seattle had been far more, it's like triple the market size. And it fell off, and in 2014 is about when its prices started to take off. And the supply kept going down and down, and the prices kept going up, and prices started to come down, supply went up. Not only did supply go up, but supply more than doubled from just a year and a half ago. And it went up by so much that the number of houses they added in Seattle, whether apartments or condos or whatever, exceeds the entire market on Whidbey. This is one of the few moderating effects for Whidbey's prices, because it's not that it changes how many houses we've got, but what it means is that folks that are in Seattle that want to find a place now have more than twice as many to pick from in Seattle. So they're not as likely to, but they have other things to look at before they look over here. Now we still have the price differential that, that price differential is kind of hard to ignore. But depending on what Seattle keeps doing is going to affect everybody else. So there is that moderating effect. Okay, so this is a Puget Sound. Not the Salish Sea, but Puget Sound. Notice we keep going a lot bigger and bigger. So here's Pacific Rim. And as much as we think Whidbey is unaffordable, and the islands are unaffordable, and Seattle is unaffordable, compared to the rest of the Pacific Rim, Seattle is down here. Hong Kong is not so. And the things they're having to deal right now are just extraordinary.
That's millions of dollars. What's the?
This is because of currencies being different, and some places you have to lease the land for 99 years versus buy the land. This is an index that was come up with that, to be honest, I don't understand the entire algorithm.
Just a relative scale.
Yeah, it's the relative affordability. The only places that are cheaper than Seattle aren't cheaper by much, and that's Portland and Sacramento. But where's Vancouver? Come on, there we go. Vancouver is right there, Hong Kong, and even Sydney. So if you're in a business that's involved in the Pacific Rim and you have your opportunity to move your production, one place to move it is Seattle, because you don't have to pay your employees as much. Seattle is already seeing this in terms of Silicon Valley companies now basing themselves in Seattle and the east side, because what it costs down there is ridiculous, which is making the prices up here ridiculous. But even as ridiculous as they are, they're cheaper than San Jose, and by a fair amount. I mean, here's San Francisco, and I mean, heck, it's cheaper to move to Honolulu, which I don't think is a bad thing. But this means that there is increased pressure from outside the area to move here. Again, it increases demand, doesn't change supply. There are some initiatives to change this, so I'm going to get to these in a minute. But basically, every single one of these places has got that same kind of issue. So it's not like we are unique. We are unique, but not unique in the fact that we've got affordability problems that nobody else does. We've got affordability problems, and they pale compared to some of the other ones. And I'm going to get to that upper. Okay, so we're going to come back to that in a different form in a minute. So all that's been housing, with a little bit of affordability getting wrapped into this one. Then we get into what's happening in terms of who's here. Because it is, the trees didn't have an issue. It's when there's people here that we have an issue. So this is data out of the Island County Housing Needs Analysis. And what it really comes down to is the fact that this is not a surprise. Oak Harbor is young and Langley is not. Freeland is not either. So these barely visible lines here, or bars, are from 2000. And in general, Island County is older than Washington State. Is that an earthquake we're having? Oak Harbor is younger, maybe personnel and that sort of thing. But then you come down to Freeland, and in 2000, the
That's the land.
the median age was 42. 15 years later, it was 55. That's almost a year-for-year change in the median age. And for that to happen, that pretty much means there's really, if everybody just sat still and nobody died, nobody moved here, it'd be a year-for-year change. That's almost effectively what's happening. That also means that you now have a median age of 55, and that also then gets into who's available to do the work, who's doing the jobs. Are they retired? Is it active income, passive income, that sort of thing? And then, of course, Langley's got the oldest population. I found it entertaining. I used to have season tickets, basically, to Wicca, and to just sit in the back row, because I always like sitting in the back row, and just see all the gray heads, and then realize I was one. So in terms of affordability, one thing they do is they compare the median value of the house and the median household income. And to get a feel for, okay, if you're living here and if you're working here, they're going to assume that that is some measure of affordability. So in 2000, you needed 3.7 times your income to afford a house. 2015, it went up to almost 5. You need 5 times what you're earning to afford a house. But that's for the island in general. Freeland, it's 7. It had been 4.2, now it's over 7. So somebody living in Freeland who didn't buy back then and whose salary hasn't risen by that much is in that much more of a hurt. And I doubt that there are many people who have had their salaries go up, I don't know, almost 80%.
Question?
Yeah.
You said salaries, is retirement income included in that?
I believe not, but I would have to go check. And for those of you who really want to dive into this, there's the URL. There's a shorter version of it in the notes that I have online. And in each one of these things, it's interesting to dive into the algorithms, but at some point it's also a rabbit hole. So I have to admit that I didn't dive into the same depth on every one of these rabbit holes. And I also am curious to see what happens. This is 2015 data. Well, it's already 2019. The census is next year. I'll be curious to see once they actually report on that data, which will probably be 2021 or 2022, which point some of this will be moved. But what that says is that the situation is not improving. If nothing else, the situation is not improving. The other thing that stands out for in terms of supply is the vacancy rate. And again, the vacancy rate is something that is determined by the census. The census calls it out generally as vacation homes, short-term rentals, or just homes that are empty. I don't know exactly where they draw those lines, how often you have to be in it for it not to be considered vacant. But in general, Washington's at about 9%, and the North Island's about the same. But because of the rest of Whidbey, Island County's at 18, and South Whidbey's at 27%. So that means that more than a quarter of the houses here are vacant. And when you talk about supply, of all the various things that we've talked about in terms of how many houses are available, that's how many houses are being bought and sold. 27% of them are not necessarily going to be lived in full time. So in terms of supply for folks that want long-term housing on the island, one response is frequently to build more houses, but houses can be bought as vacation properties, and that doesn't change the vacancy number much. If, however, you start talking about rentals, now you're starting to make something available for folks who probably aren't going to be buying. It's not going to be sold to somebody off island as a vacation thing. But that is a fairly high number. Now, I am concerned about that number for a number of reasons, but then to also put this in perspective, I just saw this data within the last week. Neighborhoods like Hamptons, Newport, Newport Shores, is it, over on the East Coast? Anyway, some of these neighborhoods are talking 60% vacant. And they're houses that are being bought to be empty. They're not houses that are being bought more than a showpiece. Some folks are buying houses just to say, I have a house there, whether they ever live in it or not. Some folks are buying houses because they think they're going to make a better return with a house than they are with stock or something else, or investing in a new company. So there's a lot of money that's getting plowed into houses just for the sake of an asset, not because of housing.
How do they tell what's vacant?
That's in the census thing, and I don't know how they measure that. But the one thing I am encouraged by is at least it means that all of these are measured by the same algorithm. They're all measured by the same metrics, and that's across the country.
Can I ask you a question? I'm not clear about what vacant means. Does vacant mean that the person is not there 365 days a year, no one's living in the house?
Like I said, so they call those, they're saying it's vacation, short-term rental, or vacant. All fall into this. But I don't know how many months empty it has to be before it's considered vacant.
Okay.
It may just be a 50, I don't know.
So the owner could be visiting
It could be,
during the summer.
But and it could possibly still be considered vacant if it's not a large enough fraction of the year.
Okay, so
And to get into that's a rabbit hole that isn't just Island County. That's a rabbit hole which is diving into the census database. And I'll be happy to do it. I love data. I'm a geek, but no one's paying me to do that. So at some point I have to just draw that line.
So where it says south, I missed, what is south? Is that South Whidbey? Is that
That's South Whidbey.
Okay,
Basically Greenbank South.
all right. So when you mentioned Newport Shores over in Bellevue,
No, I was thinking that's why I was thinking Newport Shores. There's a neighborhood in the Northeast that's within an easy commute of Washington D.C. and New York City.
oh.
Yeah, it's over there.
Oh, okay.
So the main clusters of the counties, regions that have more than 50% vacancy are places like the Northeast, Florida, and Colorado. And I've probably down to Southeast, Southwest, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go take another look at the article. I looked at the article, looked at the numbers, did a find on Whidbey, didn't find it, and went, I don't care about this. Because we're so small. But at the same time, in a population, Greenbank South, of 17 to 18,000 people, which arguably is about 8,000 houses, something like that, I don't have the exact number, that's suggesting that 2,000 houses are vacant. And if we were to say we're going to build 2,000 houses, that would be an extraordinary environmental impact. But there's 2,000 houses already sitting there. And I leave it to the politicians to figure out how you make those things accessible. I have ideas, but I'm not a politician. We're not the only ones that are having this issue. Remember I talked about the Pacific Rim. All around the world are what we call the ghost houses. That's the other word for the vacant homes. Ghost houses, though, go one step further. Ghost houses are those houses I was talking about that are bought as an asset, where they want the asset to appreciate. It has gotten to the extent that there are some streets in some of these cities that are just empty. They're $1 million homes. There's nobody in them except for less than 10%. And that is impacting these economies because while that's good for property taxes, the local businesses don't have income. And the local businesses can't house their employees anywhere local. So those employees have long commutes. It's gotten to be a real issue in some of these places. So their responses have been fairly varied. A lot of them just get down to being a taxable value, basically a property tax increase of like 1%. Hong Kong has got a one-time 15% fee. Paris has got one that I have yet to, I'm not sure if this was proposed or actually enacted, but if you could be renting it for just say €1,000 and you're leaving it vacant, they're going to say, thank you very much, we're going to tax you €600 a month. Now, I don't know if they're doing it.
They are.
Okay.
My sister in Paris, and they have a rent.
So is it 60% or they pick
I
something
don't know
else?
what percentage it is, but she says that they have to pay a certain amount, regardless of how much rent they get.
One other response was that a lot of this money that's been used for these things are not from in country. The ones that are in England aren't happening from England. The ones that are in America aren't happening from here. Vancouver took the initiative and said, if you're a foreign buyer, we're going to, in addition to the sales price, we're going to charge you an extra 15%. They did that, and the number of houses for sale went down by 80% in 1 month. The number of searches from China for houses in Vancouver also went down by a fairly large amount. I can't remember if that was 80% again or not. But that same weekend, the number of searches for China to Seattle went up by 141%. The money's going to go somewhere. Get back to anecdotes. It's hard to track who's actually a foreign buyer because folks who are doing this know enough to do trusts, LLCs, fake names, whatnot. But again, anecdotes from the east side is that the majority of multi-million-dollar homes on the east side are ghost homes, foreign bought ghost homes. Vancouver was able to just say for the city of Vancouver, we're going to do a 15% thing. We're more bureaucratic than that, so it takes longer, and one could argue it's not going to happen. Vancouver wasn't able to do it for all of British Columbia. They just did it for Vancouver, and that's how they managed to get it done. So we're not the only ones. Again, this is not just an island thing. It's not just a Pacific Northwest thing. This is a global thing. As a metric, and this is this is way underestimated. This is the number of homeless for Island County. And what that says is there's a few hundred people that are homeless. Even they say in this analysis that it's got to be 2 or 3 times greater than that. Because the homeless are very good at making sure folks know they're not homeless. I'll relay this story. There was a barista. I happened to be sitting in a coffee shop. Won't say which one, but again, I'm writing about affordability. I'm writing about housing and all this sort of thing. So they kind of got to know me, and they knew I was a local. So there was a couple that had made a comment. They'd been having a conversation about this sort of thing, and I can't remember what it was she said because I wasn't eavesdropping well enough, I guess. And then they left, and she goes, they complimented me on my scarf, on how well I'm dressed. They have no idea that I'm hanging that scarf on a tree branch tonight. And she was really nicely dressed because, the thrift stores here get awesome stuff. But that's also why it's harder to tell how many homeless there really are here, because you don't necessarily improve your job by telling folks that you're poor. And that's why, this has got to be underpredicted. But I look at this, even if it was underpredicted by a factor of 5 and you got up to 1,000, and you look at how many vacant homes there are, that paints an interesting picture for the area. We've got thousands of empty homes and 1,000 homeless. Okay, what's it take to correct that? Does that mean building 1,000 homes? Or that is, I don't have the solutions. One of the aspects I want to pass along to this is what's happening. It's not necessarily getting better, and I don't know where it's going. But one thing I do know as a systems analyst is that this is not sustainable. At some point, something breaks, and I don't know what's going to break. The good news we do have, at least in terms of if you want to increase the density on the island, and Lord knows there's a lot of folks that don't want to do that, and I can't blame them. Some of the things that have held Whidbey back have been the stuff we were talking about earlier. Is there enough water? Is there enough places to get rid of the waste? And what do you do in terms of commuting? At this point, of all the folks on the south half that have full-time jobs, 60 to 70% commute off island. So if you've got a full-time job on the island, you've got a gem. And if you don't, you have commuting costs, you're eating up an awful lot of your day. That's one of the reasons behind the big gig is if you can take of that 60 to 70% that's going off island and find a way to, with really good internet service, get them to work on island, then it benefits their life. They end up with more time. They're spending the money for lunch here. They're not having to spend as much commuting. It strengthens the community. So that's the sort of thing that can really help. Prior to being a real estate broker, I was a museum director for 5 years for an online museum. I was up here. The founder was in just outside of San Francisco. We had people that were working for us that were in Belarus, San Diego, Puerto Rico, and having really good internet made the difference for me. I know I'm not the only one. There are people on the island that are traveling to Pioneer Square to go use a shared office space because it has good internet when we could provide it here. And they're trying to. Just convincing folks is hard. The other two parts, water and sanitation. Is it raining still? We've limited ourselves to wells and things like that, but of course other places are doing other things with gray water and catchment and recycling and whatnot. And then sanitation, it's besides the composting toilets, and I always make fun of the incinerating toilets, but maybe I've done that too many times. I think they're really interesting, but they're dramatic. There are people that are coming up with new ways of doing septic systems. So in the Middle East, they find that they can't put in a septic system in sand. So what they do instead is they've been drilling holes, and instead of putting in linear, they go in vertical. They dump into that hole what they need, and they put in a system that's vertical. In the San Juans, the problems they have up there are even tougher. We're mostly gravel and sand and clay. They're bedrock. So their septic systems sometimes are just dynamite. They blast the septic system into the rock. And at this point, we're seeing solutions in other places that aren't being accepted here, but I think that's just a measure of time and folks deciding to push the county to do something different. And we're starting to see differences in terms of tiny houses, co-housing arrangements, and that sort of thing. But we got a long way to go. As you saw in those numbers I was showing earlier, the number of small houses, the number of small spaces for starters is very small. Sorry for the small, but that's the issue. And here, almost at the end here, one of the other issues that comes up with the fact that why would you sell if you can't find something you want to buy? That's not going to be anything else except for the fact that you first. And until that breaks free, then that also stymies the market. I don't know what's going to break that free, but then again, that's just sociology, anthropology, psychology, whatever it is. That's not in the data, and I'm not going to get too far into it. Whidbey is changing. And that look back on that age chart, and one of the things that's unsustainable about it is Whidbey's culture and character has been defined by folks who are getting older. And for each person that is no longer on the island, they probably haven't trained somebody to have the same culture and character as they did. And why would they? So what's coming onto the island are different folks. And that's going to be the case. We were talking before we started the live recording that there's some folks that just, they're fine with the island, but they've never had a septic system and they don't have to deal with it. Okay, they may be the folks that try to get a more innovative sanitation system in because they don't want to do the old way of doing it. And the other thing that I'm really familiar with, I mean, I got out here in 1980. I got an engineering degree in aerospace. I'm going to be in Seattle. Didn't want to work military. So 40 years ago, there were people in Seattle that didn't know where Whidbey was. Now, particularly because of Langley and Coopville, we're known around the world. We're drawing people in. Look at those prices that's happening in downtown Langley. There's demand, greater demand for this island now. And that's not going to drive prices down. That's going to drive prices up. Even if we're affordable relative to all the other ones, well, wait a minute, that's just going to increase the demand as well. So Whidbey is changing. It's going to be more visible. It's going to be involving more people that have their own character and style. And one thing I'm just keeping in mind for myself is that this island is going to change. If I live here a long time, it's not going to be the island I moved to. It's going to be a different island. Better or worse is up to personal taste. So with that, yay. Here's various places you can get a hold of me. Like I say, I have to disclose yet again, I'm a real estate broker with Coldwell Banker Terra down by the Goose. So I've got the big white truck with my name on the side of it. You see the truck drop by. But I also then put all this stuff up on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and a series of blogs that I have. So what I will do is I'll put all this up online. I've actually already got all these presentation slides up there because I put them up after the Langley one. That's the same set of slides. The conversation is different, and that's why I live stream whenever I can. And I don't put them up on all three of my blogs. I've got, like I say, I've written 12 blogs. I only maintain 4 or 5. But I will put it up on tripathcreative.net, which is about personal finance, definitely gets into affordability, and about Whidbey.com, which is ostensibly, it's a blog I put up about what it's like to live here. And for the good or the bad, or just the quizzical, why it's okay to wear socks and sandals and why that's actually not such a bad idea. The greatest traffic I think I've gotten off that blog, the second greatest, is why it's okay to wear socks, sandals, and shorts in the winter. And but the thing is, people are being attracted to Whidbey, and they want to read about a place that isn't as urban. They want to find a place that's more natural. They want to find a place that's quieter, unless you're going to Coopville. And with that, I will turn this thing off. And if you're not going to get the Q&A, sorry, they get the Q&A. But I'm willing to hang around for a while. And I'm also going to do this again up at Coopville. So if you want to have a front row seat to what the Coopville folks have to say about the Coopville data, show up. So pardon me, folks. See you guys later. And with that, you're welcome to leave, stand up, chit chat.